So can I jump in? Tiff, you would be very amused to know that of late, maybe in the last 1 week, there's been a big sort of a rush of people from Hong Kong trying to come into India, but through various strange means, you know, becoming members of chambers of commerce, etc. They're Indian names, but all these guys are sitting on boards of Chinese companies. So the Chinese companies are so, and through the Communist Party, obviously, because this has only happened in the last week or so, they're so desperate to get into India, they're using all kinds of means to get in. And so now everybody here has to be alert and stop the sort of the influx of the Chinese coming in, even through Indians who live in Hong Kong.
So Tiff, just to conclude your mini segment, do you think that there is a backlash taking place, or is it possible against China's global ambitions, or do you think that their global ambitions are going to be put on hold while they digest the impact of the COVID virus? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I mean, first of all, we've discussed it before, Bill. I mean, I do think that the Chinese economy is facing some real challenges. The second quarter numbers, which was a dramatic improvement from the first quarter, not everyone believes that they're for real, but even so, you know, it's clear that the Chinese economy is recovering, but it's doing it in a very sort of dual track system. The state enterprises have done better. There's a boom in the property sector. Higher end consumer goods are selling well. We're not seeing the same thing for the more mass part of the economy. And you just look at one number, which is important. If you look at overall in the second quarter, we've seen some income growth, not terribly strong, but it's growing. But if you look at the migrant worker sector, where there's actually about a 7% drop in income growth. They're a very significant portion, 300 million strong, a very significant portion of the overall workforce, and very important to China's continued growth. And of course, what I write about in my book as well, focus in on the other China of migrants and rural Chinese. So we're seeing that happen right now. On the other hand, will there be a real, backpedaling in China's global push? I don't think so. And again, you need to look at who, in the case of China today, it's important to look at who's behind some of the priorities. One Belt, One Road is very much a Xi Jinping priority. And that's all you need to know to a certain extent. That means it's not going to go away for a while, even as they may need to dial back. On the pushback side, I think absolutely it's happening around the world. And it's interesting to see, I think, to an extent with COVID-19 and the mishandling here in the United States, it was a real opportunity for China to push its soft power abroad. And they're still trying to do that. But we see at the same time, for example, if you look at China's top 20 trading partners, at least a dozen of them are involved in major disputes with China. If you look at some of the very aggressive things we've seen China do around the world, India, obviously, and a real sea change, I might understand from my Indian colleagues like Manjeet, that a real sea change in how Indians are looking at China today. But it happens, it happens everywhere. When the U.S. Health Secretary, Alex Azar, was just in Taiwan, which of course the Chinese see as a very provocative move, the highest level cabinet official to be there in 40 years. What did China do? They sent 10 jets across the unofficial line in the Taiwan Strait. And now that Global Times just proudly bragged about how they had to do that to sort of rebut these independence leanings in Taiwan. But even before the health secretary got there, we've seen consistent efforts or consistent flights by the Chinese Air Force across that unofficial line. We've seen clashes in the Senkaku Islands near Japan. We've seen clashes in the South China Sea with Vietnam. And the list goes on. But just one last thing. I see the decision to go ahead with the national security law in Hong Kong as a real direct message to the world that politics in command. We know there will be blowback. They knew the US would respond. They knew it would bring more Hong Kong people to the streets, but they did it anyway. There's a calculation made that security and political control is #1 in China. And I think that's the reality that the world's waking up to.
Chad, do we have any questions?
I do not see any questions flagged right
Okay.
now. People can
I-
raise their hand if they want, or send them to the Q&A.
I'm perfectly happy. So let me ask you, Tiff, the Chinese may be in over their heads in certain parts of the world, like Venezuela. Basically, you have a meltdown of what was once a very rich oil-producing company or country. And last figure I heard was the Chinese had lent them 60 billion US dollars. So could it be that the Chinese have expanded abroad too rapidly into too many places that just aren't stable?
I'm sure there's, there's specific examples, and Venezuela might be one where that's the case. But overall, I think, for example, there's a much broader push into Latin America. I think it's very much in China's interests. There's soybeans, there's copper, there's some very key things that China needs there. They are building ports in Latin America. Their digital Silk Road that some of our colleagues were talking about earlier, it fits very well with Latin America, which has a huge number of very large cities, rapid urbanization. China's a leader in smart cities around the world. And that's something that Latin American cities are taking to, and taking Chinese technology. So I think broadly speaking, they may have bitten off more than they can chew, if you will, in places around the world. But I don't think they're making a mistake in continuing to try to develop and both financial and investment relationships around the world right now. Where I do think they've overstepped is the way they've done it, and I do think there's a dramatic shift from before under the present.
Tell us about this smart city concept that, as I understand it, they go to a government and say, we can help you have a smart city. We can install cameras. We can gather facial recognition. We can have voice recognition and listen to communications for certain problems. In effect, it may have the purpose or the effect of making it easier to manage a city's water systems, electrical systems, but doesn't it also give them give a government a measure of control over the population, over what the opponents may be wanting to say or do? Tell us about this phenomenon.
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, first of all, they are gathering data. And as I said earlier, there's no reason to believe that if it's a Huawei putting it in a smart city, that data is not going back to Beijing. And yeah, just in terms of sheer leverage over the infrastructure of a city, yeah, it matters if there's a company that can shut down your water system. We haven't seen any sense that they intend to do that. But obviously, energy, water, all these things that are real vulnerabilities. The U.S. has been very concerned about vulnerabilities in our energy management system as well. So I think that's very real. Absolutely. The other thing is, as China works to develop its AI capabilities and its monitoring voice and facial, as you mentioned, one of the places that they have struggled is actually because of the relative homogeneity, although there's obviously great differences in China as well. But the fact of the matter is it's been harder for them to develop AI voice recognition and facial recognition simply because the pool of what they're looking at is mainly mainly Chinese people. Whereas in the US, we have a more robust ability to develop AI because the population is much more diverse. So there is that element as well. It does help them in actually refining some of the just like the US is trying to do, refine its AI ability.
Let me ask you one other question. To manage all this investment and all these different flows of data going back into China, they must have developed an incredibly robust IT infrastructure, including human skills, in a very short period of time. That when I lived in China, it would have been inconceivable that they would be able to do this. But it appears that they have established massive data centers and massive capability to manage all this data and to look for the things that they want to find. Do you know anything about the size of their and speed of how they've developed all this capability?
I don't have real details. Anecdotally, I did a story back for our former employer, Business Week, on China Mobile's push into rural China. And it was a very memorable trip. I went up into a Tibetan area in Sichuan, and they were putting up cell towers everywhere you went. And the Tibetans in this case were developing their caterpillar fungus business through the new mobile phone capacities. Where I live in Montana, outside of the city, we don't have mobile phone capacity. There's no signal. So and certainly when I arrived in China, this was not the case at all. But now, you know, you can be in remote parts of Tibet and your mobile phone's going to work, which is pretty amazing. It's been quite astonishing to see how quickly they have moved. The other thing on big data, often you will find that there is, if not the power of the state behind it, directly behind it, there's a lot of support. So there's a big push to do a big data center in rural southwestern China in a province called Guizhou, which I focus on in my book, is actually The Myth of Chinese Capitalism. It's pretty much was anointed by the central government as where big data should develop in rural China. And that was because of a bunch of reasons. It was because of Xi Jinping's priority of trying to fight against poverty. It's one of the poorest provinces in China. One of his very close associates, a gentleman named Chen Minar, was the party secretary, and he had worked with Xi Jinping when they both were in Zhejiang province, I believe. So anyway, again, you have a huge big data push domestically in China, and it's really about Beijing deciding, and particularly the top of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping, deciding where they want that to happen. And a lot of resources. One last thing, you'll see all the big China mobile companies are there, Apple's there, Foxconn's there, and they're there for a reason, because Beijing thinks they should be there.